Okay, everyone. I think we're getting started. We're already 5 past. Thank you so much for coming, and huge thank you to Home Trust Bank for providing delicious food for lunch. So we're going to hear from them first.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Heathman. I'm a mortgage loan officer for Home Trust. This is Sarah.
Hi.
We love sponsoring events like this because it's so important that we continue to learn about what's happening around us. We're a big part of this, and we're sort of ambassadors for everyone moving to our area. So I think there's no doubt it's valuable. What you'll hear today will be information that I don't think I've seen anyone else. So, I guess if I were to speak to what I always get asked about, it's just the Federal Reserve and interest rates. There's no real big news. Rates are still bouncing all around. Nobody has any idea what's going on. The latest from the Federal Open Market Committee was a quarter hike, federal funds rate from 4.5 to 4.75. Of course, that's the rate at which banks borrow money from the Federal Reserve to lend it back out. In this most recent release, they didn't use that word committed to fighting inflation no matter what it takes. That's been a real key word in the last few releases. So it dropped out. There wasn't any real sharp language used. The main thing I think they pointed to was that there's a lot of global uncertainty because of the war in Ukraine. So we've reached a point in the global economy that it's just so complicated and there's so much happening. It feels like we're just in a big bubble that could pop at any moment, and anything that happens, rates just, it used to be rates would change maybe, once or twice a week tops, and now they change once or twice a day sometimes. So the 30-year fixed average was 6.44 yesterday. I think you probably see most of your buyers with a little higher rate than that, just because the average doesn't take into account the purchase heavy that we see, which has a lower down payment, which increases the risk of the rate just a little bit. There's a bit of an edge that we have at Home Trust in terms of products. We do construction and rehab because we're a bank and we can manage that. I'm just going to let Sarah speak to that a little bit. We both love doing construction and rehab. So it's an opportunity, the way I see it, to look at properties that are on the market that maybe need work, right? But if you look through the lens of rehab, you're adding inventory that kind of wouldn't otherwise be there.
So construction loans are my forte. I ran our construction department for 5 years. So he may say he likes them, but I love them. So we do encourage our construction loan product, mainly because it's managed in Asheville, North Carolina. Our bank is one of the only banks that is left in Asheville. So when you call, you're getting an 828 number. You're getting somebody who lives and works in Asheville, understands our economy. Builders love that because we will actually match our draw sheet to their cost estimate. We don't tell them how much money, they actually tell us up front. Our underwriters look at it, they approve it. And then from that point on, they're kind of in control as to the budget. Of course, borrower has ultimate approval, but the bank is going to be a partner. We're not there to fight them every step of the way, which is one of the reasons we love our renovation loans. Because if you're looking at a property, especially around here, I know that my beautiful real estate agent that sold my house is sitting right there. And she will tell you that no question. We did everything to try and find a property. Of course, we were in a lot of bidding wars, and some of those properties we were looking at, she's like, I know, but Sarah, you can see the potential here, right? That word potential. Well, where would I find the money for that potential? A renovation loan. That's where I would find that. So working with somebody that isn't in Asheville that I can call, that's going to help me along the way, that's Home Trust Bank. We, as loan officers, we're right there in there with you. We know that you guys are fighting for every sale, and we want to help you. We want to encourage you. We will do everything in our power to make sure that you close on time, that you have the correct amount at your closing table, and that you're just as happy at the end of the day as your clients are. So you keep coming back to us. That's totally our goal, 100% of the time.
Let's see. So one, this relates to construction lending as well. We're both members of the Home Builders Association here locally. And we seek to kind of connect the Home Builders Association a little closer to the Board of Realtors. We've been connected for a long time, but we want to work closer together. And in a Parade of Homes committee meeting yesterday, which I'm the chair, we decided that we will allow the back cover of the Parade of Homes magazine to be purchased by a real estate agent. So I think that's a great fit. Distribution on that is amazing. So watch for that. It'll become available this summer sometime. I'm also on our city's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. It's a cause that's near and dear to my heart. I serve on the Affordable Housing Committee here at the board, and try to be sort of a liaison between those two committees. So if you're interested in that cause, we are recruiting. So join us. Anything else you want to share?
That's it. Make sure you get the banana pudding because it's really good. That's all I want to add.
Cool. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you for letting us come in.
And now for our speaker, Tim Love, who works in intergovernmental affairs with the county, here to give us an update on some broadband expansion efforts in Buncombe. So very grateful to have Tim here.
All right, good afternoon, y'all. Appreciate the time today to talk a little bit about broadband. I've got a few slides that we'll walk through today, but at the end, I think we're going to open it up to questions. And so anything I say that doesn't make sense, feel free to grill me on it later or in the middle. I'm fine taking questions in real time. So first off, I'd say about broadband, I think for years people have referred to broadband and thought of it as kind of like an IT problem. So you get someone up here speaking about like very specific download speeds or upload speeds or the type of cables that you're installing. And I think what we found is like it's a different kind of problem actually. And it's an infrastructure problem and it's a policy problem. And so if we think about it from an infrastructure problem perspective, like the solutions are different. The people that we put on a project to tackle it are different. And so you have people like me who actually know nothing about like technical details about upload or download speeds or latency or any of these things, but who does have some experience putting infrastructure projects to work. So roads, bridges, sewer, septic lines, things like that drive much of your business, because without infrastructure, how do you sell profit, right? It's a key ingredient. So either way, we'll go ahead and get started. So my agenda today, I want to give you a little bit about what we know. And that's the county's perspective. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're doing to try to tackle the issue where possible. We don't have carte blanche, right? We can't just do whatever we want. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about what y'all can do to help, not just me, but y'all, everybody who's struggling to get broadband access in the communities. So what we know, pretty basic, broadband expansion is needed. If you're in our municipalities, if you're following the infrastructure cross, so I'm talking about the interstates, you probably have pretty good access to the internet. If you're in those wedges in between the interstates, getting out to Sandy Mush, Broad River, Wester, Upper Hominy, all those areas, hit or miss. You might be able to get DSL. DSL may as well be dial-up for those that remember dial-up, which is a slow signal. And so what we did is we surveyed residents in Buncombe County. We had about 2,600 respondents to a survey on broadband, which we thought was pretty good because getting people to take surveys isn't the easiest thing, period. But especially on a topic kind of the flow of broadband. What we found from that survey is that of the 2,600 folks surveyed, 9.2% did not have access to high-speed internet. So if you think about that, that's 260 people in a survey. If you extrapolate that to a county with a population of 260,000, it's a pretty big problem. And 10% of your population cannot get access to the internet. For years, I think people thought of the internet as kind of like this fun thing. It's where you go to play games, you send some emails to some people that you haven't talked to in a while, maybe you get on social media. We've been trying to rebrand that because the internet is no longer just for fun, right? And we learned that through our survey. And our survey said specifically 61% of the people that we were surveyed, said we use the internet to access education. And so that can be your kids at home when they can't go to school because there's ice on the ground or because there's COVID. Or that could be people doing continuing education who are going to advance their degrees themselves, going back for credentials, any number of things. But we also learned that 35% of people use the internet for home-based businesses. 10 years ago, maybe home-based businesses weren't as popular as they certainly are today. But the idea that you can operate a business from home and lacking internet, lacking infrastructure that enabled you to operate your business. So this gave us some really good talking points to take out to our commissioners, to the public, to basically say, stop thinking about broadband as an IT problem. Stop thinking about it as like a nice to have. Start thinking about it as like a requirement, a fundamental basic requirement. I would love to refer to broadband as a utility, but I can't because the federal government won't allow me to. And that's a story for another day. I'm going to keep going. So what else do we know about broadband? So we know broadband expansion is needed. What you probably don't know that I know is that the situation is far worse than you ever could have imagined in terms of where our gaps are. Matt, I've broken the internet. I'm sure it's my fault. Good deal. Is that no? Okay. Good. So the map that's on the screen, I don't expect you to be able to read it and understand exactly what you see here. What you should take away from this, though, is that there's a lot of red on this map. And in this case, red is bad. And what this says is these are areas in our county where someone is unable to get 100 megabytes per second internet speeds. And I said I wasn't an IT guy and I wasn't going to talk about things like this. But 100 megs is what you would probably have at home. If you live in the city, you have Charter Spectrum internet, something like that. You probably get 300 megs. If you're thinking about, the late 90s when you were getting on AOL and it was the dial-up signal, that was about 1 megabyte per second, right? So what we've been arguing is that 100 megs is the bare minimum. If you want to operate a Zoom call, if you want to have 2 Zoom calls because your child is also accessing information at home, you need at least 100 megs. The federal government says that's not true. You can get by with 25 megs. And so we fundamentally disagree. 25 megs, that's like a DSL if you're lucky. So what we did on our own was said, we believe there's a different standard. We don't really care what the feds say. We don't care what the state says because we live here and we have to deal with it. And so we went out and went through our own mapping exercise to understand where the gaps are in our network. If you look at a state through a federal map about underserved or unserved areas in Buncombe County, it's not going to look like my map. It's going to say everything's fine. Like we're good. So what we had to do is we had to engineer our map, and it's not a perfect map, but we basically went into an ISP, an internet service provider website, and where you can enter your address and say, hey, what deals am I eligible for? Can I get service? All of that. We took that website and used it against them. And so we just took every address in Buncombe County and hammered it into their website and said, can you provide service? Yes or no? Like, let's take all the mystery out of it. If I actually called you and said, I live at 123 Main Street in Woodson, would you be able to provide service? If the answer is no, based on your website, you're red on our map. If you think that our map's wrong, tell us. And so we gave providers an opportunity to tell us we're wrong. Crickets. Not surprising. So with that said, so the map looks bad. In reality, maybe it isn't this bad. But what you probably know that I know is that in different parts of this county, it's really hard to get access to the internet at high speeds. And it's not just in the unincorporated areas. It's not just out in, Barnardsville. It's in the city of Asheville. If you talk to enough people, you'll find someone that lives in downtown Asheville that can't get a high-speed internet connection. Why that is, you'll have to ask a provider, but we're here to try to tackle that issue. One thing I would add on this, you're probably like, Tim, why did you have to go through this crazy process to figure out who's served and who's unserved? Broadband infrastructure maps are considered proprietary. So if you're charter and Tim asks you for a map, you're just going to say no. I don't have to give it to you. I don't want to give it to you. It's a competitive advantage. I don't want AT&T to have it. So we had to create our own map for that reason. We know that the federal maps are bad, so we made our own. ISPs don't play nice with one another, so we created our own stuff. So that's what we know about broadband. In addition, please don't try to read this. I provided statutes just so you would know, but the statutes are prohibitive as it relates to local government involvement in broadband. So if you're looking at Tim saying, Tim, you're with Buncombe County, you're here to help, you should just go build your own ISP. I heard that someone else is doing it in Tennessee or someone's doing it down east. The statutes say no. Local governments are explicitly prohibited in guidance, statutory guidance, from one, creating an internet service provider. So I can't go create the Land of Sky ISP. Can't do it, not allowed. Further, I cannot build infrastructure unless I am subsidizing it for an existing provider and giving it to them. So let's say you live in Woodville and you would love to have access. There's like 30 houses on your street. Tim, can you help us build a line? The statutes say no, unless I go to AT&T, Frontier, Charter, whoever's in your neighborhood, and give them the money to basically do it. Those are the only ways that your local governments can play in broadband. We're not allowed to build lines on our own. We certainly can't become a provider. The exception to that is where I am providing internet access to myself. So Buncombe County has 13 public libraries. I can build fiber to any of those libraries. Fire stations are not ours, but if they were, we could build to the Jupiter Fire Department. The issue is I can't provide service to anybody along those lines. I can service my own customer, the library, but if you live along that same road that library is built on, I cannot give you access. These are the statutes. Will those statutes change? I'd love to tell you, Latsar, go out, go talk to your local representation, call them up and say these laws need to change. Unlikely that you'll have any momentum on that because telecom is a really strong advocacy, not just in our community, in this state, but everywhere.
But that's basically the reason, the incentive for the state not allowing governments to provide internet is because of private businesses wanting to be able to control it all. Is that basically the reason?
Absolutely.
That's horrible.
It is the reality. What I will say is there are exceptions to every rule, and I wasn't in the smoke-filled room or whenever the policy was created, but there are exceptions. And so, if we think about North Carolina, if you're familiar with Wilson, North Carolina, anybody down east, Wilson near Raleigh, so Wilson, North Carolina is quote unquote grandfathered in because they have an electrical utility that Wilson has been operating for many years. And so because they already operate a utility, Wilson was able to then tack onto that an additional service in the form of internet service provision. Additionally, in Buncombe County and Madison County and nearby, we have electric cooperatives. So the one that a lot of people know in the Northwest is French Broad Electric. So French Broad Electric is a co-op. They started out as a rural electrification provider and now have expanded into it. So there are some exceptions to the rules, but in general, if you're not already providing utility type services, you're not going to be able to based on our statutes. The theory on the why, not to just cast total shame upon our ISPs, broadband's expensive, right? Laying infrastructure isn't a cheap thing, so you want to make sure that you can get payback on your investment. If you're trenching, blowing up granite so you can lay lines or putting up new poles so you can hang wires. So there is a cost benefit item here. But at the end of the day, local governments are prohibited. That said, we're trying really hard to get into the space, and we've made some progress. Not all things are bad. And if you've been paying attention at all for the past few years, you know that the federal government, because of COVID, started funneling large sums of money across the country for a number of different issues, one of which is broadband. And so a ton of money has come to the state for broadband. This is a map from the state Department of Information Technology that gives you a sense of the different funding pools that are available for broadband expansion. So the good thing about this is there's a ton of money out there. The question is, how long will it take that money to get to the house that's on your street that can't access the internet today? And so we're actively working on that. It's a process. One other item I would say, some of these funds, they didn't just go to states. Many of you, if you've been paying attention, are probably familiar with ARPA or recovery funding. These dollars that were allocated to counties and local governments across the state. And so Buncombe County received $50 million a few years ago, went through a process to allocate those funds. And we'll talk a little bit about that. City of Asheville, Woodfin, Black Mountain, all these jurisdictions also receive funds, not just for broadband, but to do other things, basically pandemic response. So kind of lay the groundwork of kind of where we are, what's the state of play, what the limitations are. Glad to take questions on those as we go. But the reality is, who cares, right? What is Buncombe County doing to change this issue? And so we'll get into it a little bit. I can take more questions, not trying to bore you too much. This graph, you heard me talk about ARPA funding, of which Buncombe County received $50 million. Of that $50 million, that second bar, $6 million was allocated by county commission strictly to broadband. So when you look on this bar, I'm not going to read all of these things to you. Number one item, $7.5 million was affordable housing. Number two is broadband. Number three is homelessness. So these are like real deal issues I know that we're all facing, you're all familiar with. But our commission allocated $6 million towards that broadband expansion. What we'll do with that money, I'll show you on the next slides, but the basic idea is to take that money and work through state grant processes. One of the other statutes that we face as a local government is the state said, if you do anything in broadband outside of a state grant process, you're never eligible for any state grants related to broadband in the future. So they tied our hands. They said, if you want to try and go it alone, good luck, Haas. And that's okay. I mean, that's a part of the deal. So we're working through that process. Unfortunately, what that means for all of us is we're at the whims of yet another governmental jurisdiction. And so that state process is slow. We're working as quick as we can, but we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a second. All right. So on this screen, I want to talk about broadband projects. I know it's a lot to look at. This is a map, and you can see there's a lot of color codes. Those different color codes stand for specific projects that we work with local service providers to petition to the state. So each of those projects is a unique broadband project with a local provider like AT&T, like Charter, like Frontier, like Skyrunner, you name it. And so when the grant process opened last year, we took a very proactive role with local service providers and said, there's state money. We want you to help us solve these problems. Here's where we want you to go. The process is typically provider driven, meaning providers just look at the map, they decide where they want to go. We took a more proactive approach and said, where we need you to go is here. We also tried to play traffic cop. So what I think is amazing about this map, and you might find it boring, you may not believe it, there's not a lot of overlap. And so we were able to traffic cop and guide our providers, AT&T and Charter, to go to different areas so that they weren't overlapping each other, so we could be more competitive in a grant cycle. Clearly, if AT&T and Charter apply for the exact same footprint in a grant cycle, only one of them is going to win, and thus we all lose. So that was our first step. So each of these is a unique project, And some of these projects we've been successful on. And so I'm going to highlight 3. There's probably more, but just to give you a sense of what's happening. So at the top, my right, your left, is the Sandy Mush Great Grant Project. And so I refer to Sandy Mush as that whole northwest corner that's above Leicester and all that. And so beautiful farmland for years. The best signal that you were going to get was going to be about 2 to 3 megabytes per second, which means that you may check an email and it may take you 20 minutes. So that issue, however, is gone thanks to collaboration with the state and the Great Grant, but also French Broad Electric, who I mentioned earlier as a co-op. And so French Broad Electric has built out basically wherever you see those gray dots at that top left. So thousands of households that were unserved. One piece of language I want to clarify here. I am only allowed to participate and help people that do not have access to the internet get access to the internet. If you already have access that is considered appropriate or good enough, according to the states or feds, I can't help you get additional access. So if you get 26 megabytes per second, which again is slow enough to get you nothing, basically, you're basically off my map. Can't help you. You're considered served. So the good thing about working with providers is that I can say to them, wink, wink, nod, nod, go serve all these unserved households, but while you're there, since you're already on the street, go ahead and build out the rest of your network, which from their standpoint makes sense anywhere. When you're laying fiber, you're not just going to lay it in pieces and parts. You're laying like linear lines that are connected, right? So that's something we expect. So whereas, French Broad Electric said we're going to serve 1,000 unserved households, in reality, they're serving 4,000, maybe more, and they'll continue to grow as that area grows. So that's kind of one of the balancing acts that we play. Similar to that, in the top center, in that lime green color, this is our newest Great Grant project. I call it North Buncombe. It basically starts at Woodfin all the way to the county line north, and then stretches to the east all the way to Reeves Creek, Ox Creek area, Barners area, if you know it. So this project just got announced last year. It was announced to be 1,000 households, but the company there, Frontier, says that it will meet 10,000 households in that area who are considered served, technically. But the good thing about this for us is we know some of those folks that are served but have terrible access, like not good enough to meet societal norms, but also will increase competition. And I've got nothing against any of the providers on this list, but if we only have one internet service provider in an area, there's no competition, service quality, cost, all of these things. It's just natural. We all know what competition does in a market. So that's the Frontier model. You'll see this start to move forward. I would say end of this year, construction, hopefully. We're waiting on the state to finalize their contracts, but that's really exciting. So we're attacking 2 big areas on the map. The next up is in the center of our map. And here we're talking about work with the housing authority. And so often when we talk about internet access, we think of those that are unserved, meaning you don't have access because you don't have the infrastructure. However, we have those that are unserved for different reasons because they can't afford it. Rates are too high. And so we've worked with the housing authority over the past 3 years to provide funds for some of their properties. And so I think we're saying 1,000 residents of housing authority properties here in the city of Asheville, I now have access that they'll continue to have access for into the future based on an agreement that we made with city schools and a number of other players. Very complicated, but it worked. So these are 3 projects. They're good from a geographic standpoint. You can see how we're tackling the issue across the county. You can also see that we're not forgetting that the city is a part of the county, which is sometimes a joke that people like to make with me. So there's different ways that we're tackling the issue. I've talked a lot about the map. Any quick questions before I keep moving?
You said the housing authority is to help serve those agreement with basically the school system. So it's in the schools basically.
It's not in the schools. It's actually in their actual housing authority facilities. But we're getting into the weeds, but it's okay. The Asheville City Schools Foundation partnered with us to fundraising to make sure that those utility bills can be paid into the future for a period of time. So that was kind of a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
What what are the other colors? I'm assuming there are other like service providers. So what's the purple and who are the reds? And
Yeah.
you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. So a couple things about color coding. So these areas that are in black, these are areas, like I've already talked about areas off limits. Guess what? There's more. Just wait, there's more. So the areas in black are considered to be an acronym, RDOF. You don't have to know what that is. But this is an auction at the federal level where an ISP can come in and say, we're going to serve Broad River, southeast corner, and we're going to get around to it sometime in the next 10 years. But it's an auction process. They get to bid and say, basically plant their flag, like this is an area I'm going to serve. And because of that, all of our grant processes that have followed that auction say that it's on the list to be served, so we can't bid on them. So if you know anybody that lives in Broad River, in any of those black areas, I would love to build a project in the neighborhood. Like, can't wait. Top of the list. But I can't. Not with county dollars. I have to find another way to do it, which is that wink, wink, nod, nod that I talked about, where we're working with the provider and saying, you see those areas right outside the black? Like, we're going to serve as many of those unserved people as possible. And the expectation is that you're going to reach into the black as well. Providers will hate me for saying this, but this is the truth. And at the end of the day, we live here. We have to try to move the needle. So that's what the black is. The black is super annoying. Additionally, you can't really see it from a distance, but just below the North Buncombe project, you see all those red stars. Those are stars. So these are protests. And this is, the process just continues. I love it. So we submit these 6 great grant projects. And then the way the process is structured is all of these applications across the state are published. That way other providers can go look at the applications and say, wait a minute, hold on. Like, I actually serve that household, that literal household. And thus, you can't award a great grant project that accommodates that household. And so that sounds fair, except what's the level of due diligence? You see all those stars on that map. Do you think someone at the state was calling each of those people that lives in those homes and saying, hey, does AT&T provide service at your house? There's no way. It's impossible. There's not enough time to do that across the state. So each of those stars was taken off of my map. They're households that are considered to be served because someone said so, even though the someone that said so isn't the actual person who lives there. And so that's a really frustrating part of my job, but that's just the reality of what happens. And I'm going to show you a table here in a second that's going to really underscore what that protest process did to our prospects as a whole as a county. But that's the deal. The good news, these are all what are called great grant projects. The great grant is a state project. We are waiting for the next round of great grant projects. And so I fully envision that another one of these projects will get tackled in our community in the next cycle. And that next cycle could be in the next 6 months. So hopefully we'll take some of these dots off the map in the very near future.
Were these areas selected because they had the most unserved, like in that range, and you said they didn't overlap, or were there other underlying reasons why?
Yeah, it's a combination. And so first and foremost, so the providers that are here naturally have infrastructure. So as much as charter is kind of prevalent in our minds as a provider, they don't have infrastructure everywhere. And so providers are going to build around their connections. And so there are certain areas where we literally have no footprint, and those are really hard to get to. But we work with providers to build on their existing. Yeah. One of the things that's really exciting that we've learned is some of our best providers to work with broadband are those that you may not think about, and some of which were actually hated in our communities. And so Frontier is a great example of that, and AT&T. And these 2 providers are old school telephone providers. And so they got into the game very early, but they didn't upgrade their networks. And so a lot of people in rural Buncombe County think of these providers as terrible because they can't get good access. The reality, though, is they have all of the things that we need from providers to move quickly. They already have the rights of way. They're not purchasing easements because they've already got telephone poles, or they've already got trenches where they build lines. All they have to do is upgrade those lines.
So I do think we'll start to move quicker as we engage folks like Frontier and AT&T, which have been some of our biggest successes.
Are you saying they are going to upgrade your server and be terrible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So to be eligible for any of the money that I've been talking about today, you have to have a minimum of 100 megabytes per second, a minimum. And so that's sufficient for most people, but most of those providers are going to offer better service anyway because everything's changed. It's all better.
So like for AT&T, I know there's some people who have AT&T systems that offer very low megabytes, but AT&T is not upgrading.
Correct.
So any timeline where that might happen, but what are they waiting for? Are they waiting for?
They're waiting on money. And so on this map, there's two AT&T projects. Neither one was funded, but maybe one will get funded in the near future. The two AT&T projects, there's one in the southwest, that purple color. That's kind of Upper Hominy area. And then there's one kind of in the green, just below the North Buncombe project. So that's kind of like Bee Tree area. Think about that, Swananoa. But yeah, the old school network for AT&T is really slow. And what I learned about internet that's kind of scary, some of these old DSL networks are physically constrained. So they have a DSL box, and this is not technical terms, but that DSL box can serve 50 households. And so once it gets to 50, nobody else can get service until somebody else basically loses service and they take one of the things out of the box, and then they can it's literally that old school. And so all that stuff's going away. It's all about fiber to the home, which is something that's coming quick. I've got just a couple more slides, but I'm glad to talk more as y'all love to. So how can y'all help? The biggest thing you can do for us is help get the word out. Our biggest disadvantage in the broadband space, aside from the regulations, is the fact that our data, after all these years, is still really bad. And the reason our data is bad is because we've been developing these maps at the highest level, a top-down level. And what we really need are maps that are formed by people that actually live here, are actually in this world. Not at the FCC, not at the state, not at Buncombe County, but wherever you live, fill out this survey and tell me if you have access. Because those are the dots that go on my map that I can then funnel into projects and say, we need to tackle this neighborhood that's right behind the school that everybody thought had access, but guess what? It actually doesn't, because who knows why. But the only way we really ever know is if people tell us, because there's nobody else that knows except the person that lives there.
Does it have to be a resident, or say we're showing a house and we're out somewhere, can we also take the survey for the owners?
You can absolutely do that. I would encourage it. You're going to see places that, a lot of people won't. And so you get that opportunity. So this survey instrument, this is actually a picture of a postcard that we distributed to 20,000 households earlier this year, because we thought they might not have access, but they really know. There's also mechanisms, because everyone gets a chuckle whenever I talk about taking an internet survey. If you don't have internet, it's irony. But there are ways that you can do this, and those are on the left. My left, your right. So if you don't have access to the internet, you can do a paper survey, or you can text. There's different mechanisms there. So you can share those with people that that are maybe in areas that don't have access.
We go to the website, will those phone numbers be on there as well?
Yes. And Matt, you're welcome to share anything we presented today with everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's the big piece of what you can kind of do to help. The other thing I would say, and I was going to put in the slides but forgot to, providers respond to organization. And so, one household is not going to change a provider's mind. But if there's a group of 10, a group of 20, a group of 30, like a neighborhood association, doesn't have to be an official one. They'll respond to that and will deal with a group of people more so than they will a single person. So as you're showing homes and you're realizing, hey, this house is the last house on this street, well, there's 15 more. down in this cul-de-sac that don't have access. Unlikely, but it's possible. Organizing those 15 households is one mechanism to try to move the needle as either a homeowners association or not. So that's a strategy.
Does or will low Earth orbit satellite access play a role? Or
Great question. Yeah, and normally I present a slide that shows like the different types of broadband service. And so there's a handful. So one that everyone likes to talk about is SpaceX, like Elon Musk type stuff. And the theory, what I would say, the technologist theory is that absolutely plays a role at the top of, like, if you live on top of it. Like if you're in like the hardest place to reach, like that's a really good, like to fill in the final gaps, like that would be a great service. For the average, person, probably not. Part of the reasons, there's not enough satellites, the consistency of the signal is debatable, things like that. But that's today. That could change. If Elon goes and tosses up, hundreds more satellites, that could change greatly. But that's how we're viewing it now. It's that's when there is no other option. That's going to be your option. Next up, we have kind of fiber to the home. So this is these are fiber lines that are on telephone poles in the ground, all that. That's the stuff that the majority of you probably have. That's the good stuff. It's expensive. That's how the majority of folks are going to get access. Next up, we have something called fixed wireless. And fixed wireless is basically like if I've got a fiber line connected to my house, and then I decided to build a radio tower beside my house for some reason, connect it to that fiber line, and then wirelessly distribute an internet signal. People can connect to that. An example provider that does that is Skyrunner, if you've ever heard of that. And they're a great homegrown provider here. The issue with fixed wireless is if you've got a bunch of trees, like you do in the mountains, or if you have mountains, that wireless signal isn't going to go through the trees. It's not going to go around the mountain. It's going to be very much limited by line of sight. But it's a great solution if you're in the middle of, a holler and you have one really tall thing like a barn or a radio tower, and you can get everybody in that holler. That's a good thing. So Skyrunner has a role. Next up, which is really exciting, but it's not far enough along yet, is 5G wireless. And so our cellular providers, T-Mobile, Verizon, whoever you've got, they have signals everywhere, just about, not literally everywhere. And there's dead spots all over the map. But they're starting to ramp up their efforts to provide kind of higher speeds, so that you can, basically the cell phone signal is the determinant whether or not you get access to internet at your house. And so that's another model that's in play as well. It's not as fast or as reliable as traditional fiber to the home, but it's a part of the tool.
I think our experience is that 5G is slower. They rolled it out and it was this doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
I agree. And it's, the footprint, I have AT&T just because I've always had it. And my worst signal is at my home and my office. And my office is in downtown Nashville. My home, I'm just in Hall Creek. So it's
Well, Verizon isn't any better in either of those places, just so you know.
But those networks are going to build out, and we're actually undertaking a separate effort to look at cellular signals across the county. And we'll face similar challenges in terms of building out that network that we do here, when we're not going to be able to unless we give money to a private sector company to build out the network. But we're looking at it.
So Hayward Electric doing anything at the Buncombe with internet?
Who?
Hayward Electric.
Not that I'm aware of, but
They serve Fairmount, the western side.
yeah, I know that they've got some projects that are coming into our county. And I would say with French Broad, they're great. They work fast, but they're also pretty. Their statement to me was, "Tim, we're not coming any further into Buncombe County with internet service until we can provide for our existing customers first."
They're in Madison now.
Yeah, they're in Madison, and so I respect that though, because they're saying I've got electric providers that don't have internet access. I'm going to serve them because they're my customers first, and so I respect that. But one day they'll finish that, and they're saying end of 23, that they might have a good chunk of that. So we'll see.
Are other counties doing projects like this as well? Do you guys collaborate? Does Buncombe collaborate with them? You know, some of these places that are right on the border.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's not everyone has, like, all our counties are not created equal in terms of like staffing, right? You know, Buncombe's fairly big, so someone like me can spend time on a project like this, whereas in a county, you know, like Madison, much smaller staffing footprint. But I would say our 4-county Land of Sky Council of Governments region, which is, of course, us, Henderson, Madison, and Transylvania, pretty good footprint. Like, we've been trying to move the needle as our 4-county region. Further west, like Clay, those areas are really strapped. And so hopeful that they'll be able to make some progress. The state's trying to play a role, but at the end of the day, to really move the needle on these projects, you have to have somebody that can identify household by household who has access and who doesn't. That's the level of detail you gotta get to. So, other questions?
Being one of the yellow dots in the Weaverville area up there, when is Frontier going to start doing their really physical construction on that?
Yeah, it'll be this year. There is a 3-party contract between the state, Frontier, and Buncombe County that is under review right now. As soon as that gets done, you know, they'll have to mobilize construction crews and stuff like that, but it should be this year for sure.
And how long does that take to finalize, or is it kind of
It shouldn't be too bad. You know, the state's negotiating with 100 different providers at this point, and they're basically saying this is the agreement, take it or leave it. So I think it'll go pretty quickly, but it's a contract with 2 governments and a telecom. But I think this year you'll see construction for sure. And so the majority of those yellow dots, all of those yellow dots. Yep. I have one more slide that I will share, and then we'll take questions or we can wrap it up. I wanted to talk a little bit, and this is me opining more than I'm probably supposed to, but I wanted to talk about competition because I think it's important in this space. And so, what can LotStar do to help? You know, one, you can help us get the word out, but 2, you know, when you're talking to people that know things, you talk about competition and why that's important in this space. So these are the different applications that were submitted in our great grant process. And so you can see the number of households on the far left that were originally proposed. So we get to about 7,500 households across 6 different proposals. The next column over is the number of households that were left after the protest process. So we went from 7,500 to 3,700, which means that of the homes protested, about 50% were occupied. So that protest process that I was complaining about earlier took out 50% of the houses that could have gotten internet access in this proposal process because somebody said so. And that's it. And so for me, irks me. The final thing that irks me is when we talk about competition, you know, the provider that most of y'all think about on this map is Charter, and I've got nothing against Charter. They're my service provider. But when we gave them an opportunity in a competitive grant process to see how many households they could serve in all of Buncombe County, they came up with 219. 219. I'm just being honest. You can see all those other providers, when given a shot to play, came up with all of these additional households that they could somehow serve. Even after we got through an appeal process, let's say some of these households were not valid. They're made up, they're already served, blah, blah, blah. Even at the end of the process, we still had 3,700 that could have been served. And so my point is, like, the system is sort of structured in a way that supports defense more than it does offense from building out the network. And so that's something that, like, I like to make sure people understand. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, like, we need more players at the table because this is the business case. So I wanted to share that with y'all because this is something I harp on a lot. And again, no criticism at anybody. You know, different companies are at different places in time, and they can only do what they can do. So, That's my presentation. Open to taking questions. This is all public information. I've shared it with boards of commission before, so nothing.
There's the smaller private organizations that do these, and I think like telemetrics, for example, that's kind of smaller, strong provider as far as what I've heard. Do we have anything like that in Buncombe County, or are these pretty much the ones that bigger options?
These are kind of the big ones. There's some others, and we're open to new players in the market. The thing you run into with new players is, are they for real? You know, are they here to stay? Is this just kind of a quick, like, are they capitalized to do these projects? Like, from a literal sense, like building out a network is expensive. And so that's something we run into. So you got to make sure the financials are tight. But the markets are changing too.
Some years ago, Duke was doing broadband over power. Is that still an option, or did that die?
That died. But, you know, as we talk about, like, what are the quickest ways to advance the network? You heard me talk about existing telephone providers. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that if Duke was interested in building out a network or providing access to their power lines, we could see a network build out extremely quickly. They've got lines. It's not that simple, unfortunately. You get into really the minutia of like pole regulation. You know, literally on a telephone pole, like, or a utility pole, what's the difference between lines that you have to maintain so you don't compromise somebody else's network? So it gets kind of ugly quick, but that's a path.
So, well, thank you so much.